Welcome to Success Weekly with James Tharris, a weekly dose of thought-provoking ideas and helpful tips on improving your mindset. And now, here's your host, James Tharris.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Success Weekly. I'm your host, James Tharris, and we're going to continue on with psycho-cybernetics. This is from Chapter 3 here, and we're going to talk about that this week, about your imagination. We kind of talked about it a little bit last week, but Chapter 3 is called Imagination, the First Key to Your Success Mechanism. And what it says here is a human being always acts and feels and performs in accordance with what he imagines to be true about himself and his environment. So as I've said a couple of times now, if you're around people that call you names, and they're not just endearing names, you're idiot, retard, loser, those kind of things, and it's not just your brother or your sister doing it playfully, but somebody that continually reinforces it. Maybe they do it. Maybe you're with a group of people and they're doing that to get laughter from the other people in the group. That's a person that I'd get away from, because they're going to convince you things about yourself that you're going to think that are true that are really not true. They don't have to be true, in other words. And it might even be, in some cases, it could be our parents telling us these things. And so we have to learn how to reprogram our minds and really get that crap out of there. I mean, that's something I had to do, because I had some situations in my family where that's pretty much what was going on. And I was told that I was second best and I wasn't good enough and I wasn't smart enough, and the comments that I made and the thoughts that I had about things were just stupid. And so I kind of grew up feeling like I was stupid. I can even remember telling one of my martial arts students about 20 years ago, the more you get to the more you get to know me, the more you're going to say to yourself, man, what a dumb guy he is. I remember making that statement to a student of mine, and man, that was how dumb of me, no pun intended, or whatever that is, to say that, because I was reinforcing that in my own mind. And really, I'm not a dumb person. I'm not a stupid person. I'm an intelligent person. And I've got to believe that about myself before I can actually become that. And that's kind of what this chapter is about. And it's your imagination. And I'm going to go to this next little highlighted place here. I just lost it here. Okay, here it is. This is important because we use this in the martial arts, and we call it creative visualization. So typically, we'll start our martial arts class with a period of meditation, sometimes 30 seconds. Maybe that's usually what it is, about 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And that's really a time where we kind of wipe the chalkboard clear, so that you have room for learning in your brain before class begins. But then after class, we teach students to meditate and creatively visualize what they want to look like and be like as a martial artist. So it might be, for somebody like myself back in those days, visualizing myself being able to drop into a full split, or visualizing myself kicking straight up over my head. Two things that I was really never able to do 100%. But I got to the point where I was able to do them well enough that it passed for that self-esteem and for that image that I created in my self-image. Because that's what I would do. I would sit after class and meditate, imagining myself being in a full split. And while I did get down to a full split very briefly, but I injured myself doing it. And since that time, I'd never gotten all the way back down where I was flat into a full split. But I've gotten close. And that's the reason I believe I was able to get close again, because of my visualizing that I was able to do it and seeing everybody else being able to do it. My situation turned out to be something I really couldn't work around or work through, because it was a physical limitation. I had an injury, and my hips were built differently, and they weren't going to allow me to do some of these things that I really, really wanted to do. So it's kind of like that old adage that if you shoot for the star and you miss, you shoot for the moon and you miss, you land among the stars. But if you shoot for the stars and you miss, then what do you have? You don't really hit much. And something along those lines. You could say it the other way around. If you shoot for the stars and you miss, you might land on the moon. But if you shoot for the moon and you miss, then you didn't really hit anything. And so it's kind of like that. And it's like goal setting 101. If you want to achieve a goal, you set your goal for well beyond what it is that you actually want to achieve, and then you actually end up achieving that goal, the real goal, in the process of doing that. And so that's kind of like negotiating. If you've ever negotiated for something, maybe you put an ad on Craigslist and you wanted to get, let's say, $500 for something. Well, if you put up on the list, Craigslist, that you're going to sell this widget for $500, typically what happens is people will come back and they say, well, I'll give you $450 for it. And then your job is to come down from there and try to meet them somewhere in the middle. And instead of getting $500 for it, you end up getting $475 for it maybe. So if that's what you really want to get from it, you set your goal and you say, okay, I want to get $500 for this. So let me put it up for sale for $600, and then somebody would come back in and say, let me give you $500 for it or $450 for it, and by the time you get done, negotiating back and forth, you end up at $500, which is the goal that you really wanted in the first place. And that's an example of how you can use this book, Psycho-Cybernetics, and use it in real world activities and things. And that's just a really simple example of it. But I basically did that same thing with my flexibility and my kicking abilities. And I achieved a lot of success out of it. So it says, here's what the quote says anyway. It says, your nervous system cannot tell the difference between an imagined experience and a real experience. Now, if you think that's not true, think back to the last time you saw a scary movie and how it made you jump in your seat. Anybody on this podcast that's listening to this podcast that was around when the movie Jaws came out, the first time that head fell down out of the ship that looked like it had been chewed on, I remember jumping out of my seat like 3 feet, and everybody else in the theater doing the same thing. If you've not seen the movie, maybe you can go watch it and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But the music gets you to jump, and the scene that you're looking on screen, even though it didn't really happen, even though none of that stuff was really real, it convinced our minds to believe that it really was real. So we felt fear, or we felt anger, or we felt sadness, or we felt anxiety, or we felt elation, like the way I felt when I first saw Back to the Future. When I walked out of that theater, man, I had just been taken on this journey back to 1955 and came back to 1985, and man, I just thought, wow, this is incredible. My mind was just totally blown. And then the first time I saw the movie The Matrix, what am I getting at? It's the same thing. You have to learn to realize that you can create that same thing in your own life for real. That's where the Matrix movie got it right. We're in a matrix, and we're basically shackled to the program that we've allowed to run in our brains for up to however old you are right now, and that's why you are at in your life where you are, because of the program that you've allowed to run. You've got to learn to reprogram it, and that's where, like this little quote says, your nervous system cannot tell the difference between an imagined experience and a real experience. That's why virtual reality is coming into being right now with these virtual reality headsets for virtually anything. Video games and movies and whatever. And it really tricks our brain into believing that we're really there. And you see people with these headsets on responding as if it's really happening to themselves. And so if you can learn to do that same thing through creative visualization and visualizing yourself with 20 pounds less on your body, visualizing yourself being able to jump higher or run faster or run further, or succeeding in that business, or asking that person for their phone number and getting a yes, or whatever it is you want to achieve in your life. You've got to learn that you have the ability to program your brain by imagining it as if it's really happening. So that's one of the things I used to use in my martial arts classes for teaching self-defense. I would tell people to sit back and relax, and maybe you would try this with me yourself. Sit back and relax for a second. Now let's imagine you've learned a few self-defense techniques first, okay? So get a few self-defense techniques in your mind, whether it just be you punch somebody in the nose, or you step out of the way, you block it and you strike back, or you throw a front snap kick to the groin, or whatever it is, just some simplistic self-defense technique, all right? Have you got that in your mind? Okay, now this is what I would actually do with my students, and occasionally I still do this because it really gets them to bring out the essence of their training, the raw power and raw tenacity and raw energy that it takes to defend yourself if you ever have to do it. So here we go. Close your mind. You got your eyes closed? Close your mind. Open your mind. Close your eyes. Do you have your eyes closed with me? Okay, now imagine you're out with your friends and your family at a local pizza shop, and you're enjoying pizza and drinks, and you're having a great time, and you get into your car after you finish. You start heading home, and it's dark. It's like 11:30 in the evening, and it's very dark and kind of cold outside. And you see the trees they've lost all their leaves, so it's probably like November time frame. And you get home and you see that the front door is open, and it's been cracked open, and you know you didn't leave it unlocked. So you get that really funny feeling in the pit of your stomach. You're with your friends and your family, and they're in your car, and you tell them, "Hold on a minute, you guys stay here. I'm going to go check this out." And you slowly creep up to the front door, And you look around very suspiciously and very cautiously, and you're trying to be as quiet as you can. And you quietly push that door open. You step inside, and you start investigating one room after another. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, 3 guys surround you, and you realize that there's somebody has broken into your house, and you have to defend yourself. The first guy comes at you with a punch to your face. How do you defend against it? Go into action. And just by doing that right now, I felt this little surge of adrenaline, and this little my face got flushed because I actually imagined that happening. And so I would teach my students then to use the techniques that I've taught them in class, and then when I'd have them open their eyes, I would have them actually do the self-defense technique against their opponent. And man, it was totally different than what they were doing just 5 minutes prior, because I got their minds to really think about, you're learning this to maybe defend yourself or defend a family member or save your own life. And it's amazing when somebody visualizes using it for real, how much harder they train and how much more emphasis they put on doing it properly and not worrying about whether they're enjoying it or not. What really happens, though, is once you get your mind engaged like that, that's when we really start enjoying things. So in martial arts, we do some things that are solo training, kicking the bag, or running our forms. Some systems call those katas or forms. Those are basically just like shadow boxing, prearranged routines where you're defending yourself against multiple opponents surrounding you. And even though that's maybe not really what's going on, if you think about it like that and you visualize that these people are attacking you, my goodness, you can get so much more accomplished as a martial arts student if you learn to just visualize it. And so that's kind of goes right back to that little quote that I just read. And it's a way of role-playing, basically. And role-playing is how you get better at things. If you think about like the SWAT team, how often do they role-play going into a building and locking that building down? They do it frequently so that when the real thing happens, mentally they've been there before. And it's the same thing in school when they do tornado drills and fire drills. How seriously do those teachers and faculty members take that drill? Even though there's no fire, no tornado, they take it very seriously, because if it happens to really happen sometime in the school year, they want the students to have been there mentally before so that they're much more prepared for it. And that's the same thing we've got to do in real life, everyday life. We've got to learn how to kind of mentally rehearse the things that we want to see happen in our lives. Some of those things are going to be survival things like that. Maybe you're going to survive the zombie apocalypse. So, you plan an escape route from your house and where you would go and things like that. And that's probably something everybody should do, because you never know what can happen. And it doesn't have to be the zombie apocalypse. It could be anything could happen, a natural disaster, and you've got to find your family members. And if you haven't made that plan, and cell phone towers are down, now what? So having that plan is probably a good idea. But you can also do that in ways in areas of your life that you want to see more success in. Do you want to see yourself lose 20 pounds? And you've got to start visualizing yourself 20 pounds lighter, and then you've got to visualize yourself enjoying food without all the extra toppings on it. You've got to learn to visualize yourself actually enjoying drinks that are not fattening, and that doesn't include low-fat beer or whatever they call that. Light beer. There's no such thing as light beer. It'll all make you fat. So you got to visualize yourself as a person who doesn't like drinking beer for a while. You've got to visualize yourself as a person who doesn't like smoking anymore. You've got to visualize yourself, doing the things that you should be doing, and seeing yourself like I did on that pedestal in first place, like I talked about. I think that was in my last podcast talking about that, or the one before that. You've got to do those kind of things and role play a little bit. That's the more role playing you do, the more comfortable you get in that scenario, and the more likely it's going to happen to you. And that meaning the things you want to see happen in life. So just by you practicing a fire drill, I don't think that's going to be attracting a fire into your house. But my goodness, if it happens, how much more prepared are you going to be? So it's a good thing to do. But you've got to learn to turn those tables and learn how to do those same kind of things with areas of your life that you want to improve. And so for a lot of people, that might be quitting smoking. It could be losing weight or getting back into shape, or just doing something positive with themselves instead of laying around playing video games all day long, eating another pizza, getting fatter, and not accomplishing much. So if you're guilty of that, as long as you recognize that that's what's going on, you can do something about it. You've got to visualize yourself, though, as being something more than what you are right now. So you've got to see yourself driving that car that you want to drive. How do you see yourself doing it? Maybe you with technology today, my goodness, it's so easy. You can go in and pull that car off the internet and then superimpose a picture of you sitting behind the wheel, driving it down the road, and post that picture up on your bedroom mirror or your bathroom mirror or someplace that you can see it every day. There was a couple of years back, I made a special calendar of myself. And what I was trying to do, this is when I came to the realization that I was probably not going to achieve the full splits again. Because of injuries I've had to my body over the years with my back and my hips and my knees and my ankles and just the things that I was doing to try to get my flexibility, I thought for sure I was going to be able to do this. What I did was I cut out pictures of people who could do full splits, and famous people sometimes, like Jean-Claude Van Damme or Bill Superfoot Wallace. And I cut their heads out and put my head in it, and I made a 12-month calendar of each one of those months had a picture of me, basically, doing the full split. It was my face on all these pictures. And I'll tell you, I didn't achieve my full splits by the end of the year, but I did regain a lot of my flexibility that year. And it was very powerful seeing that image of myself on the wall because it made me want to focus on stretching more. Unfortunately, that year, I also injured my body in the process of doing that, and I had to back off of that training toward the end of the year, but nonetheless, it's that kind of thing. So if I want to I did the same thing with a car. 2005, I wanted to buy. It was the first time I'd ever seen a car and said, "Man, I want one of those." Because prior to that, as long as I had a piece of, metal that rolled down the road and got me from point A to point B, even if I had to get out and push it a couple of times here and there, I didn't care. As long as it wasn't very expensive and I could, get it to start and go. That's kind of what I cared about for cars up until about probably 2001 or so when I started really caring about how a car looked. And then I went and bought them at these buy here, pay here places. But they were nice looking cars and they were decent for what they were. So the first time I really saw a car and said, man, I want one of those, it was a 2005 Mustang GT too. I couldn't go for just the base model. I had to have the Mustang GT. So what I did was I grabbed a picture of it off the internet and I customized it using Microsoft Publisher, a publishing program where I could create designs and things, and I put these different designs and custom made it the way I wanted it to be made, and I put that up on my window and I put it as my screensaver, and I'll be darned if I didn't have that car 6 months later. Now, I didn't really know where I was going to find the money for this car or how I was going to afford it, but I was able to afford it. And now, thinking back on it, I didn't just buy one, I bought my wife one as well. I don't even know how I accomplished that, the how-to and how I got the money for it and how I financed it and whatever and how I even came to that point. But what I do remember is wanting it so badly and visualizing myself driving that thing and visualizing myself owning that thing. And of course, it had to be convertible. And that was my first convertible car ever, and I will never not own a convertible again. I mean, I love convertibles. It's such a nice feeling to drive in a convertible when the weather is beautiful and sunny and you can just see things and hear things. You don't experience the same thing when you're driving a regular conventional car. So for me, it's got to be convertible. Anyway, I loved that car. It made me feel like $1,000,000. And and I wanted my wife to experience the same thing, and so I bought her one as well. And we used to race them together, and we would play around. And neither one of us wanted to ride with each other. We each wanted to drive our own car, And it was a wonderful experience. But it started with me getting an image and role playing in my mind of what it was like to own that car. So I would go into the dealership probably once every 2 weeks, and I would test drive. This is before I had the money for it or anything, and I would test drive it and take it out and just get behind that wheel again. Sometimes I would just go in and sit down for 10 minutes and smell the leather and feel the steering wheel and turn the stereo on, and I would, transport myself to a time and place where I actually owned the car. And it led me to actually being able to own that very car. Same color, same make, same model, everything. It was wonderful. And I ended up having that car supercharged from the 300 horsepower stock to 500 horsepower. And before I sold it and traded it in for my first BMW, and that was all there was to the Mustang. And then, of course, it led to the next one, which is Mercedes. So I had to move up the food chain. As far as a Mustang, going from a Mustang to a BMW, it can be a big jump. And then, of course, from a BMW to a Mercedes, again, some people might think that Mercedes is better. Some people might think that a BMW is better. I happen to think it depends on which model, which is kind of true with most cars. But for me, in my mind, Mercedes was just a little notch higher than BMW. And that's probably because I used to hear those jokes where they'd say that something like the effect of, yeah, he's so broke that he had to trade in his Mercedes to get a BMW because he was so broke. Something, I'm paraphrasing a joke that I used to hear. But that's probably why I thought that way, or why I still think that way. But for a time, I didn't think that there was any way I could afford a Mercedes-Benz. Now I happen to own a convertible Mercedes SL 500. It's not a brand new car, but one of these days I'll probably buy a brand new one. Now the Mustang that I bought was brand new. It was the first and only brand new car that I'd ever bought in my life, and maybe the last brand new car I ever buy in my life. But who knows, But it all came from learning to improve my self-image and realize, hey, I deserve this just as much as the next guy deserves it. I can make this happen just as much as the next guy can make it happen. Heck, if that guy found a way to drive that, look at him. He's no more special than me. He's not any more handsome than I am. He's not any taller than I am. In fact, that guy's got less hair than I do, and I don't have much to begin with. And all these things that we use in our brain to kind of convince ourselves that we're not worthy of it, we don't deserve it, those are the things that hold us back. And so learning to role play being successful helps you become more successful. That's why it's important to have like wealth indicators around you. If your goal is to make more money and be more financially successful, then you've got to have little wealth indicators around you to reinforce in your mind that there's an abundance of things and not a shortage of things, and scarcity mentality. That's why for me, I like to wear a nice watch, and I like to wear nice clothing. I like to wear nice shoes. I like to drive nice cars. I like to live in a nice home. Heck, 20 years ago, I didn't care about any of that stuff. But guess where I was at 20 years ago? I was so much further down the social chain and social ladder that it's remarkable that I've climbed to where I've climbed at. And it's not because I'm any better than anybody. I'm not. I'm no better than anybody listening to this podcast. And anybody listening to this podcast can achieve what I have achieved. And you know what? Anybody listening to this podcast, probably 9 out of 10 of you, could probably achieve double of what I've achieved. That's what I honestly believe. I honestly believe that. I don't view myself as lucky. I don't view myself as more intelligent than anybody else. But what I am willing to do is I'm willing to listen to people more successful than me, tell me what I need to be, how I need to change my thinking, and what I need to focus on in order to get these things and become more successful. And my goodness, it just happens. I can't explain it to you any better than that. Reading Psycho-Cybernetics was one of those steps in the right direction. I mean, this guy, for instance, is a doctor, or was a doctor. In order to become a doctor, you'd think that somebody has to be pretty smart. So listening to what a doctor has to say about success might not be a bad thing, especially if you're, working for the state capitol building like I was as a electrical assistant, which was a kind of a fancy title for a guy that walked around the state capitol building delivering 5-gallon jugs of water to the state offices there, and once in a while changing a light bulb. That's what I did, because that's that's all my self-image allowed me to do. I didn't think I could do. I didn't think I could walk into a place and ask to become a manager of something, or become a sales rep, or become an IT person. I don't think that was even much of a deal back in those days, but you know what I'm saying. I didn't believe much in myself, so I stuck with really low-paying jobs and easy-to-get jobs, the low-hanging fruit. I worked in every fast food restaurant that there was at the time and went from one to the next. And then, of course, I got this job at the state capitol building as a result of my stepfather getting it for me. And if it wouldn't have been for him, I probably would never have gotten that job. And I still would have probably been working in fast food restaurants. And because that's what my self-esteem and my self-image told me. Now, I had a short stint where I thought I was going to be, a recording star and this rap god and all these kind of things, and this professional DJ and things. And that, I poured everything I had into that, financially and otherwise. And I came to the realization that, wow, I had a little talent, but not enough to make it big. But then, looking back on it, my goodness, if you look at some of these singers, I mean, Tom Petty, for instance, he's not the greatest singer in the world. There are anybody that's ever competed on American Idol is a better singer than him, but can they carry a tune the way he does and make it as unique as he does, and write original music and songs the way he does and put his own little flavor into it? No, they can't. That's the reason why he's a much bigger musical artist than most of these people that have ever competed on American Idol. So if I had thought like that, if I had read this book back at the time where I was making my rap music, and by the way, don't ask me for any of it. I'm not going to give it to you. It's nothing you're going to hear anyway. You didn't miss anything. But if I had had this book and this information back at that time, how different could things might have been? How many times have you listened to a musical artist and think to yourself, wow, how did they ever get so big? I think that so many times when I listen to music from some of the artists out there and go, wow, how did they ever make it? Somebody must have been smoking some serious stuff to let that person have a record deal. But nonetheless, they got the record deal, and even if it was just a one-hit wonder, and even if that one-hit wonder wasn't a great song, somehow that person got in there and got that done. And why can't I do the same thing? You see, that's the thing that holds us back is comparing ourselves with these people and thinking, oh, they've got something I don't have. You know what they have that we don't have? Guts, courage, just to step out and try. You never know what can happen. But the people who really make it in life and are most successful are the ones that do the role playing, and they visualize and imagine themselves having whatever it is they want to have, or being whatever it is they want to be, or doing whatever it is they want to do in their lives. And that's really the ultimate key to your success starts in your self-image. And that's what this chapter had to say. And there's more to it. I could give you more, but there's really no point than giving you any more, except for maybe the last thing here, the practice exercise. And I've been talking about it for the past 25 minutes, and that's to hold a picture of yourself long and steadily enough in your mind's eye, and you'll be drawn to it. Picture yourself vividly as winning, and that alone will contribute immeasurably to success. Great living starts with a picture held in your imagination of what you would like to do or be. So set aside a period of 30 minutes each day where you can be alone or undisturbed, relax, and make yourself as comfortable as possible. Now close your eyes and exercise your imagination. It's that simple, folks. It's that simple. Looking back on it, that's what I've done. And I haven't done it exactly to that 30 minutes per day or whatever, but I've done it even more so, in fact. I do it daily, a little bit every day, instead of trying to cram for it and do this huge project of trying to 30 minutes a day to sit and meditate for 30 minutes a day on this kind of thing. That's difficult. It's easy to do to start, but then to keep doing it, especially when you're not seeing results, it's very hard to keep going. But you can always pop in another CD to listen to from Anthony Robbins or Zig Ziglar or somebody like that. You can always open another book like Psycho-Cybernetics or an Og Mandino book or any book that kind of talks about self-help and being a better person, a better version of yourself. You can always do those things a little bit every day, and it's amazing that after a while it compounds and it adds up, and suddenly you look back and you realize how much you've changed. So that's the message I've got for you today, guys. Just learn to exercise your imagination and learn to believe that whatever you want in life, you can have, do, or be. I'll see you next week.
That's all for this week. Tune in next week for another episode of Success Weekly. Do you have an idea you'd like James to talk about in an upcoming episode? Post your comments and be sure to share this podcast with friends.